that Australia will resettle an additional 12,000 refugees from the Syria-Iraq conflict. These will be permanent resettlement places over and above Australia's existing humanitarian program of 13,750 this year, rising to 18,750 in 3 years' time. This is a very significant increase in Australia's humanitarian intake, and it's a generous response to the current emergency. This decision has been based on discussions that the Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, has held this week with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and other agencies in Geneva. As well, I've worked closely with senior ministers and officials here to develop a response that best reflects Australia's proud history as a country with a generous heart. As I indicated yesterday and confirmed today, our focus for these new 12,000 permanent resettlement places will be those people most in need of permanent protection: women, children and families from persecuted minorities who have sought temporary refuge in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey. I do want to stress women, children and families, the most vulnerable of all. The government will shortly dispatch officials to the region to begin working with the UNHCR to identify potential candidates for resettlement. We will move very quickly, but everyone who is resettled in Australia will be subject to the usual security, health and character checks. These checks are absolutely necessary. We must play our part in this humanitarian crisis, but as Prime Minister, I must always act in our national interest to promote community safety. I thank the state and territory leaders and community organisations for their public officers' support. These offers will be accepted, as this is a burden that must be shared by all governments and by the wider community. Today's commitment by the Australian Government to take refugees on a permanent basis will be one of the largest commitments made to date anywhere in the world. But hundreds of thousands of people are in camps and they need urgent assistance. So in addition to these new resettlement places, the government is also announcing that we will directly pay for the support of 240,000 displaced people in countries neighbouring Syria and Iraq through the UNHCR and other agencies. This additional direct assistance will deliver food and blankets and other emergency supplies for the coming winter and is expected to cost $44 million, bringing to $230 million our total humanitarian contribution to the Syria-Iraq conflict. There's no doubt that an effective international humanitarian response is vital, but we also have to address the fundamental reasons why people are fleeing. We have to act with our heads as well as with our hearts. As a free and democratic country, we must stand against those who wish to destroy life and to build a terrorist state. That's why, after careful consideration and in response to the request some weeks ago by President Obama, the government has also decided to extend Australia's current airstrikes against Daesh in Iraq to Daesh targets in Syria as well. There can be no stability and no end to the persecution and suffering in the Middle East until the Daesh death cult is degraded and ultimately destroyed. That's what our armed forces are doing in Iraq, and we need to do it in Syria too. As we all know, Daesh does not respect borders, and its onslaught in Iraq is supported from bases in Syria. We cannot defeat Daesh in Iraq without defeating Daesh in Syria too. I emphasise that our aircraft will be targeting Daesh, not the Assad regime, evil though it is. And we're not doing this alone. Other coalition countries, including the United States, Canada, Arab countries and Turkey, are already striking Daesh in Syria. Others, such as the United Kingdom, are likely to join this effort soon. But I do want to stress this is very much in Australia's national interest. We know from our intelligence agencies and from 2 terrorist incidents and 6 disrupted attacks that Daesh continues to reach out to Australia. Destroying this death cult is essential not just to ending the humanitarian crisis in the Middle East, but also to ending the threat to Australia and the wider world. So as Prime Minister, I am proud of our armed forces personnel who will take up this fight in our name. I am proud of our immigration officials and the community leaders who will work to resettle these vulnerable families in our country. But most of all, I'm proud that today our country and our people will be true to our history as a place where those in fear of their life, women, children and families can rebuild and start again.